I want to talk about culture today, and I want to talk about retention today. And so, Mon, I'll come to you and ask you around, what is your flavour? What are you feeling, especially in the coaching space, about the cultures people are creating in the leadership space that you work within right now? What are you seeing as the trends for, we should be doing this for our culture? And how is that coming through for you in the business that you run?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think definitely seeing and hearing about wanting to create space where people can flourish.
Okay.
Flourish, thrive, nurture. Those are words that I'm hearing a lot. We want to bring through our best talent. We want to celebrate difference. We want our leaders to have confidence to lead. I think what the challenge is, though, is understanding your role in that. So as the leader, the leader leading the leaders, if I could say that.
Yes, I like
the
that.
leader leading the leaders, understanding your role in that, because it's not just over to you, okay, you go and do your coaching and it's all fine. I think there's the connection back to being able to hear without breaking confidence. So I think what's really helpful is when we can feed back key themes to the leaders leading leaders, right? Feeding back those themes to them, because you may think it's really obvious, but they're not always aware of what some of those barriers are and what those blockers are. So being able to support leaders, yes, they want people to thrive. They want building trust and confidence is a term that I use a lot. They want it to be that. They want people to give their all and work at a fast pace. But I think it's that bit about then understanding, as you said, what in your culture may not be what you think it is. What may be the things that are blocking that may not be on your radar, So we're seeing a lot with women leaders. I work with a cohort of women leaders in senior leadership roles in financial services organisations and in consultancy organisations. Excellent at what they do, but stressed out, frustrated with constantly having to deal with the things that happen when you are in a male-dominated environment.
Okay.
So the underrepresentation arm of it. So it's not their capability, their technical capability, bang on the money. Their ability to lead their own teams, bang on the money. But managing that dynamic and manoeuvring in that dynamic constantly when the culture hasn't changed yet. So like you said, what the organisation is saying is right, but at the moment it's not there. It's weathering. It's really weathering them. And so, yes, equipping them with the skills and approaches to manage and manoeuvre that. But I think it's also really important that play back to the organisation, because there's things that they can change in the short term that will help that.
Okay.
Yeah, so long term, there's more to do. But really hearing that, people wanting the space for people to thrive and to do their best work, but maybe not always understanding what those barriers and blockers are.
Do you think that there's something in what people think culture should look like as opposed to what it should look like? And by that I mean everyone at one point in time had a vision of a good culture looks like this, shiny, happy people. But actually a good work culture looks like this, a cohesive group of people who have different thoughts, who come together, who can disagree in a healthy fashion, who can agree in a healthy fashion. And that's also a public face of what good culture looks like. Do you see the difference in that? And have you experienced that? And the reason why I ask is we've all been in business post-COVID, our own businesses or senior level roles, and there's a definite marker in the sand, isn't there, of pre-2020 and post-2020 in culture specifically, because as you mentioned in another conversation we've had, that was a defining moment. A lot of people were talking out loud about, you're looking at this on the website, but people, this is what it's like under the hood. This is what it's really like here. And a lot of companies were called out for not having positive cultures, and not toxic positive as in overtly shiny happy people on a website and everyone's amazing here and you want to work here and hear all the benefits and the money. It was like, no, not that, this. So I'd like to see what your definition or your just your experience of pre and post COVID is around culture. And that can be when you're an employee, as in like when you were in-house and when you started your own business with your clients.
How I'm seeing culture at the minute, Tacita, is the analogy that I like to use. It's like we've got an old Georgian building that we've built a Victorian house on top of, and now the brand new loft conversion.
Yes.
And the loft conversion is the bit that everybody wants to look at right now. And I'm like, hey, but guys, your foundation's rotten. What are we doing about this? But they want the nice, shiny, new bit at the top. We have never worked in organisations with 5 generations before, never. So when I was coming up and worked at the BBC and other organisations, even at Rolls-Royce, there were maybe 3-4 generations max. 3, yeah. So 3 definitely at the BBC. And even though they didn't promote a command and control environment, but the way in which you were inducted into an organisation, hierarchy was king.
Oh, yes.
You didn't question it.
No.
It's how it was. Yeah. And people can make sense of that because based on your role and where you sat in the organisation, you were deferred to in a specific kind of way. That's been flipped on its head. Now, the top of the tree and senior leadership are here answering questions to the generations coming up, to the Gen Zs. They want to know. They're asking the questions and you've got to prove to them when it was the other way around before. And so it's causing...
It's uncomfortable for many
causing
people.
Friction.
Yeah.
It's causing friction. So the culture that I see at the moment is really trying to, it's understanding how we can reconcile that. How do we hear the different generational voices that exist, that coexist in one business? And how do we get to a place where everybody feels like they belong in that environment, irrespective of your background, lived experience? But how are we building an environment that you can thrive in and you feel like you have a voice in that space? Because coming up, we didn't necessarily expect or have a voice, whereas it's being demanded of now. It's a very different conversation.
And it was accelerated in 2020 to 2022, that lockdown. I think it was there before. You've always got, your new generation coming through and the way that they want to do things, new technology, but the speed in which we were all leveled, the speed in which people were demanding answers, and the speed in which I think people who used to be at the top of that hierarchy were uncomfortable about the culture that they had created, because it was fine up until then. It wasn't, but you can kind of do stuff. And now the spotlight is massively on what does good look like, and can we make it look good but be good?
And one of the biggest examples of that is now the ways of working. So if we think about the generations that have come before, and so the big decision makers that are sitting on executive committees and leadership teams, that now we're trying to undo the business case that was made during COVID, is that we can work from anywhere. If we've got Wi-Fi, if we've got connectivity, we can work. There's a flexibility and treat us like adults, because that was expected for nearly 3 years. And now we're undoing that. So we've got the tension at the top that's saying, come back into the office. And I get it, because in some instances, we're paying for this incredible space. We want you to come together because it's important for our culture. But then we've got the younger people coming up who are saying, no, I don't need to be in the office, or you're asking too much of me, or why can't we be flexible like we were? Because it's all they know. If they graduated in 2020, working from home is all they know. And they don't know opening up the office and locking it back at night. And so a huge amount is missed. So I see the argument both sides, but I do worry that we are veering back to traditional old ways of working by not thinking about how we can really flexibly accommodate those who perhaps have genuine need to work remotely or not be in the office.
I'm always intrigued because there are many organisations who are saying different needs of different businesses. So where it's okay and you can deliver what the business needs, you can work from anywhere. You can work anytime you want, you can work any hours you want, as long as your work is done. And it's really interesting because there appears to be a correlation between that and those businesses have people working a lot of hours. So, this kind of thing, you're opening it up to the skivers, they're not going to... Actually, in many instances, it's the reverse way around, isn't it? The culture is that, actually, yes, we have full autonomy, but I want to do my work. I want to do a good job. My workload is heavy and I want to crash through it. It's not because I want to mess around at home. We've also got people who may have other responsibilities. Portfolio careers, I think, are common now. And I know when I was in the NHS, for a lot of people, it was frowned upon or uncomfortable that you did something else outside, or you wanted to only work part-time in a full-time role because you were honest. I've got another business, or I like doing this other job that's completely different. And I think, there's an opportunity to embrace the benefit of that. Someone who's fulfilling an interest or doing something completely different, what perspective they then bring into what they do in the business. So I really hear you on encouraging and supporting, senior leaders to think more openly about flexibility, but that challenge of what can you do to underpin and maintain the kind of culture and keep people connected to that culture if you can't do that through them being in a physical building together? What are some of the things you can do that? So I think that's a real key element in the current climate, that connection between culture and retention. How do I keep the space of the way we do things round here if I'm not physically seeing you, or if we're not physically seeing you, or there's not a physical space that we gravitate to?
Yes.
How do we still have that?
And how do we bring the younger generations along on the journey? It's not solely at the exec leadership team for them to flex to the younger generation.